In the late 1960s, musicians George Harrison and Eric Clapton found themselves fighting over the same woman. That woman was George Harrison's then-wife, a model named Pattie Boyd. Eric managed to steal George's wife away from him, all the while remaining friends with the Beatles guitarist. Some have speculated the musician used voodoo to do so. Many years later, Pattie Boyd came out with an intimate account of the story. Join Facts First as Pattie Boyd hides nothing about her tragic love triangle. Though not all popular music fans will know the name Pattie Boyd, they'll likely be familiar with the two famous songs written about her. Pattie's a former model that found herself the object of affection of two competing musicians during the late 1960s. That was, of course, George Harrison and Eric Clapton. George Harrison wrote the song Something for Pattie during their marriage. The song was included on the 1969 album Abbey Road. Eric Clapton certainly had a lot to live up to if he wanted to compete romantically with George Harrison, but he did so by writing the song Layla. Eric ended up recording the song with his new band, Derek and the Dominoes, and it was released on the band's 1970 album Layla and Other Assorted Love Songs. Before the album's release, Eric premiered the song to Pattie in private. Eric had already expressed his romantic interest in Pattie before showing her the song he'd written for her. According to her, Eric played the song 3 times over for her before asking her what she thought. Pattie claimed she was immediately worried the public would know the song was about her, but this didn't end up being the case. Pattie was so moved by the fact Eric wrote the song about her, she finally gave in to the guitarist's romantic advances. Things only got more serious between Pattie and Eric later that evening. Pattie went to a party while George stayed home. Eric Clapton ended up being at the same party, and he and Pattie began socializing. George showed up at the party later and wasn't happy when he saw how close Pattie and Eric were getting. Upon approaching the two, George was told by Eric he was in love with his wife. Pattie Boyd and George Harrison met in 1964 while the Beatles were filming A Hard Day's Night. Pattie was hired onto the film to play the part of a schoolgirl, and she was immediately stricken by the appearance of the band's guitarist. Though Pattie was apparently dating someone else at the time, she couldn't help but fall for George's advances when it turned out he felt the same way. George Harrison apparently mockingly asked Pattie Boyd to marry him during their initial conversation. Although the guitarist was just goofing around, the two ended up marrying only a few years later. It was several years into their marriage that George wrote the iconic song Something for his new wife, though things had already apparently taken a turn for the worse in their relationship. In 1968, the Beatles went on their famous trip to India, where they studied metaphysical concepts alongside the Maharishi Mahesh Yogi. After coming back from the trip, George became incredibly obsessed with yoga and esotericism, and Pattie didn't quite like the impact these newfound fascinations had on her husband. Apparently, the thing George Harrison was most stricken about by the yogi way of life was that all the various gurus had a stable of concubines. Upon his return to America, it was George's goal to emulate this trait. In doing so, he began to be rampantly unfaithful to Pattie Boyd. During this time period, Pattie became incredibly depressed. This opened the opportunity for Eric to step in and seduce her. Hey, if you're enjoying this video so far, be sure to give it a like and subscribe to Facts First if you haven't already. And stick around for a lot more about Pattie Boyd. According to Pattie Boyd, she became incredibly hurt when George Harrison began to express romantic interest in other women during their marriage. One of the women Pattie suspected George of becoming involved with was actually a former flame of Eric Clapton's. George invited her to come stay with him and Pattie after she and Eric broke up, with George explaining to his wife she needed a place to stay because she was distraught. But Pattie began noticing the woman didn't seem very distraught, and instead seemed to be spending quite a bit of time fraternizing with her husband. After a bit of time of Pattie coexisting under one roof with George and Eric Clapton's former flame, Pattie apparently gave her husband an ultimatum. Pattie left the house and told George she wasn't going to return until the other woman was gone. A short time later, George called her and told her the woman was indeed gone and she could come back. As things got worse between Pattie and George, Eric Clapton began coming over more and more. George and Eric had become friends, with Clapton often coming over to Harrison's house to work on music. But now it seems the real reason Eric may have been coming over was to get closer to Pattie. Though Pattie claims Eric was incredibly shy around her at the time, the guitarist managed to win her over with his subtle charm. Eric apparently took the time to notice small things about her, which was something George had long since stopped doing. Eric knew he couldn't have Pattie, so he ended up setting his sights on Pattie's teenage sister. Eric met her sister Paula in 1969 when Pattie took her along to a concert. The two became instantly smitten, and Paula was soon living with Eric at his mansion. But Eric wasn't satisfied with Paula and still felt he needed Pattie. It was around this time Eric wrote Layla. Before inviting Pattie over to listen to the song, Eric wrote her an anonymous letter expressing he was still in love with her. Pattie initially assumed that a crazed fan had written the letter, but a later phone call from Clapton revealed it was, in fact, he who had written it. Pattie Boyd was born in 1942 and was working as a shampoo girl during her teenage years when someone spotted her who worked for the magazine Honey. That person offered Pattie a job as a model, and the work led to appearances in other magazines, including Elle and Vogue. Before long, Pattie was offered her life-changing role in A Hard Day's Night. She had worked previously with director Richard Lester in a series of commercials. George and Pattie married in 1966 and remained married until 77, despite the fact that their marriage began deteriorating soon after its inception. 2 years after officially divorcing George Harrison, Pattie went on to tie the knot with Eric Clapton, a decade after he wrote Layla for her. Sadly, their love story didn't turn out much better. Soon into their marriage, Eric began cheating on Pattie with various other women. Much of this behavior was spurred on by Eric's worsening pattern of substance abuse. After a decade of trying to make things work, Pattie and Eric ended up divorcing in 1989. She then decided she didn't want to date any more rock stars. Instead, she found a third husband in property developer Rod Weston. They started dating in 1991, shortly after her divorce from Eric Clapton. But they didn't get married until recently, in 2015. Although Pattie Boyd coming out with her intimate account of what happened between her, George Harrison, and Eric Clapton put a good deal of speculation to rest regarding the love triangle, there are some who believe that what really happened between the three involved voodoo. Some think that Clapton used voodoo to steal George Harrison's wife from him, and they also credit said voodoo with George and Eric remaining friends. According to those who believe these tales, Eric Clapton learned voodoo from fellow musician Dr. John, who allegedly gave the guitarist a love potion that he gave to Pattie Boyd. Now it's time to hear from you. Did you know 2 of the biggest rock songs ever were written about model Pattie Boyd? Let us know in the comments section below. And before you go, make sure you give this video a like and subscribe to Factsverse if you haven't already. Click the bell icon to stay updated on all our latest content.